What's up, Brad Pack? I wanted to do just a very brief intro to this conversation that we had with our guest today, because not only do they warrant as much of a you know incredible prologue, prelude, whatever you're supposed to use there, but you will this there will not be any video. I have tried doing an intro for this like 3 times. And this is just a conversation that doesn't want to have an intro. Man, there will not be video. And I mean, there's video now, but after this, none. Why? Because this conversation happened a while ago, and we're just now putting it out. And this was back when I was still trying to figure out how everything worked. And I thought I pressed record, and I just didn't. Just didn't. I mean, I pressed record on the audio, so we have audio, which is great, but no video, which is a shame because I just love that visual. But our guest today, I guess we could say guest, is someone that I've come to greatly respect over just the small, brief interactions that we've had. We first met a couple years ago in Colorado in this collaboration that I did with Austin Wintry, and you'll hear more about that. But our guest is Professor Alice Roberts, who, in addition to being a professor, is a biological anthropologist. She's an author. Her new book, Tamed, is out now. And she's just someone that with every conversation I have, not only do I learn more about her, which is compelling and fascinating enough, but I also just learn a little bit more about her field of expertise and also just her worldview, and which challenges mine and forces mine to expand. So those are the kind of conversations that I love to have, and we thought you would love to participate in that as well. So today will be, Tom, I think, is going to do like a little cool visual thing, but by and large, by the by, it will be a predominantly audio podcast. This is our conversation with Professor Alice Roberts. Let's get into it.
Garageband, is that all right?
Perfect. A little sync
Lovely.
clap.
And how does it sound? Does it sound okay?
Great.
Lovely.
Do you hear
I did
my
a bit
dog?
of a test. Yeah. I did a bit of a test earlier today because I'm doing a radio program for BBC Radio 4 on Monday evening.
What are you doing?
So we were just doing it's a panel show with Brian Cox. Have you heard of Brian Cox, physicist?
Come on.
And Robin Ince, and they do a thing together called Infinite Monkey Cage that I've been on a few times. So I think it was on the first ever one, which must have been 10 years ago, something like that. And then I've done a couple since then.
You guys are like the punk king and queen of science, because I mean, you with your lovely locks and your general demeanor, and then the whole history of music that Brian Cox has. And just the way that you view your field, to me, is revolutionary. I feel like diving straight into it. And it's so funny because I was scrambling just before we got set up and everything, and I was like, I really want a cup of tea. I feel like that's appropriate. And it dawned on me, I don't even know that's just a cultural assumption, right? It's like, oh, British, clearly. It's the afternoon for me, clearly. But at the same time, being someone from Texas, I didn't own a pair of boots, a cowboy hat, or was on a horse until I was 30. So I mean, like I buck all the trends. But is that you? Are you the classic tea drinker?
I'm not a massive tea drinker. I really like coffee, actually. So
I knew it.
I tend to drink coffee. I have coffee in the morning and then get into the afternoon and start drinking tea. But my husband drinks ridiculous amounts of tea, and he's we're in lockdown at the moment, and we've been in lockdown since middle of March. And one of the things we've stocked up on is just masses and masses of tea bags.
Have you noticed your consumption of tea increase during quarantine or decrease? Like he
Probably
could be doing all of it.
Well, I think you notice it because you're at home, so you kind of notice that you're consuming stuff more. I'm definitely drinking a lot more coffee. What are you guys doing? What state are you at anyway?
I mean,
are you in Texas at the moment? Where are you?
No, I'm in Los Angeles. So if I was in Texas, it's like, yeehaw, everybody. We're just all free and roaming around, and we'll see how this whole thing plays out.
Yeah.
For us here in LA, it's kind of like it's such an interesting. This was such a great sociological. I don't want to call it an experiment because that sounds like for some reason it's a bit reductive to think of it that way. But you clearly got an image of an accurate image of the different type of people, and it was immediately binary. It was
Mm.
immediately polarizing by a simple fashion adornment. Either you had a mask on or you didn't. And that thing without was a statement all by itself, whether or not you believed this thing was real or you didn't. And it was by and large, you immediately saw the demographic of it because it was like this age felt this way and this age felt this way. This ethnicity felt this way, this ethnicity felt this way. And you got this crazy, like instant haptic feedback from a demographic standpoint as far as where you fell on this whole spectrum. It was crazy to me. And by and large, I mean, we didn't change much about our life. We're natural, kind of like homebodies, and we just kind of like we don't order out of food. We don't go to many restaurants. If we do, it's for an occasion, or I'm traveling.
Yeah.
I've told
Yeah.
people by and large the biggest impact that this had was that every day we used to go to the supermarket and we would like go and we had our people that we'd see there, and it was just kind of this family ritual that we did. And so not being able to do that was one of the biggest impacts that we had. But you're like stuck back in the woods. Like you like really went into quarantine, right? Or is that just where you actually live?
I mean, the UK as a whole went into lockdown fairly
Sure.
late, I think, sort of end of March. I was in the middle of filming in mid-March, and I think at that point, I mean, I'd wanted to basically go into lockdown myself since the beginning of March, at least. I've been watching this happening and knowing that this virus was spreading. And yeah, by about mid-March, I was filming. I was in London, didn't want to be in London at all. And that there was an evening when Boris Johnson said, "Okay, we're saying no unnecessary travel." And at that point, I called it and I rang the exec producer and said, "This is unnecessary. We're at a point now where everyone we're filming with is stopping work, and I think we should just stop."
Looking back, it was, and I've allowed myself to kind of change and own the fact that I walk around a fairly glib, optimistic person. And I recognize the dangers and the different things in life that can be a hazard and could be potentially dangerous. But by and large, I'm a pretty plucky guy. I like to think there's like, we're going to get through whatever it is. And this was one of those things that I was actually in London. I was at Heathrow and I landed on my way to Kuwait, of all places. And I land at Heathrow, and I get a text from my manager saying, "Do not get on the plane to Kuwait. They've just canceled the entire event due to the crowd." I was like, "What? Really? Like
When
this
was
has
when was
happened?"
that?
End of February. So
Yeah.
I was right at
Yeah.
the top of it, and I literally walked out. I walked into the lounge and I said, "Can I go home now?" And they said, "No." And I said, "When can I?" And they said, "Tomorrow." They said, "Okay." And I came back and I flew home. And my wife was like,
No.
"Did you just?" Because I was literally 24 hours. I was there for like in London.
That was quick.
I went and grabbed a sandwich at Pret and came back. It was this one of the shortest stopovers I've ever had in London. But I looked back at it now and go, man, we were really at the cusp. I had no idea. There was nothing predicated in history, save for a few random events like the bubonic plague, which that happened so long ago that doesn't have any impact on us culturally. Or we had a big influenza outbreak in 1918. It's like that
Yeah,
was
yeah,
100 years ago. That doesn't really
yeah.
matter. Being English, you guys are like, we're so used to this. The way that famine, plague, and pestilence is like those are the colors and stripes on our flag. But I wasn't prepared for this. So this definitely had a different kind of impact than I. The beauty of it all, though, is that in the midst of all this, I decided to launch this thing, and over the last several weeks, I've had the opportunity to chat with some truly incredibly remarkable and compelling and interesting people, and have some great stories. And I don't know if there would have been another opportunity for me to sit down with you to be able to do this and be able to do it this way. Like this is now the acceptable form of communication. You jump on
Yeah.
Zoom, you
Yeah.
sit down in your room, you make a cup of tea, and you sit down and you have a great conversation. So, okay, Siri. Um, so it's afforded these wonderful opportunities for me to sit down and I don't know if I could ever do a proper introduction of you, um, because I could sit here and go through. I've got wonderful notes that hopefully we'll get through some of them, and if not, we'll have a great conversation either way. But you and I met in Colorado, and our mutual friends had put together this 3-act play meets TED Talk meets uh, with a 60-piece orchestra on stage. And we didn't meet until it was the day of or the day before. Maybe it was the day before for rehearsals.
Yeah, we had a little bit of rehearsal time, didn't we? It was crazy, absolutely crazy project. I loved it.
It was a whirlwind.
I don't think I've ever done anything like it before.
I certainly haven't either.
It's a really weird thing to do.
Yeah, and you were certainly you're no stranger to public speaking, and you've definitely been in the public eye for some time. So that was nothing new to you. But something like that was so unique. And what I loved about it, especially, was the night that we had one performance, and the night that we actually went live and on stage was the same night that was the same time as thousands of women were marching on our state capitol in protest of essentially the patriarchy and just someone who clearly had committed an offense and was in the past, and it was this great statement for women, and that on stage, the people that were being represented on stage were three, not only just women, but three of the top people in their field speaking intelligently about their specific, level of influence and their passion. And to me, it's
pretty amazing, isn't it? Yeah, to have three prominent female scientists. And I think that you kind of look at it and think, well, from an equality point of view, there probably should have been a man there. But on the other hand, there've been men for a very long time. It's actually quite nice to have events like that where you do have a panel which is entirely female. And I think it is, that kind of thing is amazing. If you think that absolutely would not have happened 50 years ago.
Absolutely not.
We've come a long way in a generation, I think.
And it's strange to think that it has been just a generation. And you're someone who focuses on not a single generation, but multiple generations across millennia. I feel like you should, because I will do such a poor job of it. Who are you? What do you do? Because I know that you're also very particular about the specificity of your title and your passion and what you like to call yourself. So do a better job of introducing yourself than me.
So I'm Alice Roberts. I am an anatomist, and as well as being an academic, I'm an author and a broadcaster as well. So I suppose my original training was medicine, and then I went from medicine into academia, and the area that I studied was biological anthropology, and particularly within that, a lot of that ends up being study of old bones. I mean, it sounds better if you say biological anthropology. Within that, I was fascinated by looking for evidence of ancient disease in skeletons and tracking diseases through time. So that's my kind of very niche expertise, I suppose. But more broadly than that, I'm interested in the biological evolution of humans, and not just actually biological anthropology. I think as a biological anthropologist, you can't help but being interested in cultural anthropology as well. So it all kind of meshes together: biological anthropology, cultural anthropology, archaeology. But then the stuff I teach more actually at Birmingham University, where I'm based, is good old fashioned anatomy. So on the bookshelves behind me, I've got my
Grey's Anatomy,
these are
right
my
there.
go-to Grey's Anatomy. Yeah, big old Grey's Anatomy. And these beautiful atlases by Sabota. So, I mean, I'm a clinical anatomist as well. So I'm not just about the bones, I'm about the whole structure of the body. That's my kind of background.
Starting off in medicine, do you believe, I mean, most people, once you don't just go, never mind, and you switch. Was that a jumping off point for you, or was there a switch to focusing on anthropology Where, what caused that shift? Or would you call that a shift, or would you call that an evolution?
It was really weird actually, because I didn't intend to leave the clinical career behind at all. So I did my medical degree, I did my house jobs, my internships in South Wales. And then I saw this job, which I thought looked amazing. And it was a 6-month job teaching anatomy to medical students at the University of Bristol, just in the southwest of England. And I thought, and Bristol was my original hometown as well. And I thought, well, I might just go back to Bristol for that 6 months and teach anatomy. That's quite a normal thing for young aspiring surgeons to do. That's kind of what I'd set my heart on. I wanted to be a surgeon. And the job involved teaching during the day and still doing a bit of surgery. So I would literally teach medical students during the day in the dissection room. So you're in the dissection room all day with human cadavers, teaching anatomy, jump on my bicycle at 5 o'clock, cycle to the local hospital and do the night shift at the local hospital. And I did that 4 nights a week and 4 weekends, 1 in 4 weekends. So I was kind of doing teaching anatomy, but still keeping my hand in with the surgery. And then I got to the end of that job. And it's one of those really weird things when you kind of look back over your career and you go, well, I could have been quite happy. I could have quite happily stayed in surgery. I loved surgery. And I could have quite happily, finished the end of that 6-month teaching job and then gone back to being full-time clinical with a passion for teaching, still a passion for anatomy, but a full-time clinician. But a month before the end of that job, my boss resigned. And he was a biochemist by training. He, at the age of 34, I think he was 34 when he resigned to go and study medicine. So he decided, having been, I think, around medics for a long time, that that's what he was going to do at that point in his life. That left the department in a pickle because they just went into a spin going, oh, we need somebody to, manage anatomy on the medical course. And with the utter hubris of youth, I mean, I was in my late 20s. I went, I've done this for 6 months. I reckon I could do that job. So I applied for the job and got it. And I think at the time I thought, I'm loving the I absolutely love teaching. I hadn't really anticipated how much I was going to just, fall into that job. And really, I'd always loved anatomy. I'd loved it so much. I'd done an extra degree on it in the middle of my medical degree. But the teaching, I adored it, really, really loved it. So I thought, I'll do it for another 6 months and then I'll go back to clinical. And I think I kept on thinking that for about 3 years as I got rolling contracts at the university. And then eventually I kind of went, they said, do you want to do a part-time PhD and, become a proper academic? And I thought, yeah, I think I probably am just easing myself into academia now. So it wasn't a sudden shift at all. It was more of an evolution. And it wasn't a negative decision to leave surgery either. It wasn't a sort of like, oh my God, I can't cope with that, I'm going to go off and become an academic. And I think in a parallel universe, so talking to my friend Brian Cox about parallel universe, it's always interesting that there's multiple versions of you in many other universes. I'm not sure I believe that, but let's just imagine it for a while. There is me as a surgeon, and I'm perfectly happy. Probably as a pediatric surgeon, that's what I wanted to do. So surgery with children.
Do you? Oh my gosh, what a noble effort! That little article that NPR just came out with about, I'm sure it was distributed among other people, so not just NPR, but they said they've detected there's evidence now of a potential parallel universe where physics operates differently, time operates differently. Did you see this?
No, I did not.
Oh my gosh.
No,
I don't know how you can say evidence of it, but I mean that's me punching above my weight, for certain. But I was curious. Whenever somebody says anything about parallel universes, I'm like, did you see the article? What did you think of
I haven't.
this?
You need to talk to Brian about that. He's the one to talk to you. But I mean, he certainly says that's it's interesting actually, because I'm quite good friends with Brian, but also with Jim Al-Khalili. He's another very physicist in public, I suppose, in Britain, does a lot of television and radio and that sort of thing. And we end up meeting each other at various events where we're sort of speaking. We do a kind of circuit around the country speaking to school children and that kind of thing. And what's interesting is that Brian and Jim have very different views on this in terms of how far you can take the theorizing, I think. And I don't want to misrepresent their views, but having chatted to both of them about it, this is what I took away from it, was that Brian says that the kind of the necessary outcome of quantum physics, which we know explains things very well, where we can predict an outcome and measure it, is that actually you must have a multiverse. There must be multiple versions of the universe and multiple versions of reality. And whereas Jim, on the other hand, because I can't get my biologist's brain around this concept, and Jim, on the other hand, thinks it's a prediction that comes out of quantum physics, but it's not necessarily true. So although quantum physics is a very powerful tool for describing how things work in the world that we can observe, we have to be very careful about any predictions about things we can't observe. And that we might just be, I suppose it's a difference between thinking that with a particular theory and a particular framework of theory, you've either uncovered the reality of the universe, or you've developed a model which explains it very well, but not completely. So it depends what you think about that. I stick with biology and looking at old bones, I think.
Well, I was about to say, first of all, the second you said multiverse, I was like, unless you have a Lilliputian accent, I'm not believing you, because of course that's the way that Brian Cox would say it with that lovely lilt. Do you think that you as a biologist, using Brian as a convenient analog, you're both scientists, right? You're both incredibly, you're doctored, you know your stuff. But you said just a second ago that being a biologist prevents you from kind of believing that. But you're also this, there's a layer of abstraction that you indulge yourself in. I don't know if you would consider yourself an artist. Would you consider yourself an artist? Because you draw beautifully.
Yeah, I do. I do like drawing. I don't. I've illustrated some books, but I consider myself a bit of a dabbler when it comes to art. But I do enjoy it. But I don't do enough of it. I started off this year. I mean, you've touched a bit of a sore spot there, because I started off this year going, I'm going to do a drawing every day. And I did a drawing. I did a drawing every day. And then I did a drawing every day for most of January and February, and did it publicly as well. So I was kind of posting them on Instagram and Twitter, and then a couple of other people said, "Oh, brilliant, we'll do it too." And that's kind of now embarrassing, because there are these people on Twitter who are saying, we're doing this because Alice started it, and I'm like, yes, but I'm not really doing it anymore. So I'm gonna have to give myself a kick and start again, because I do love drawing. I like doing kind of technical drawing. I've always illustrated my anatomy for my students. So, and I think it helps you to understand it. And that's something I'd like to get more into my teaching this year as well.
Was that something that was like a necessity out of function to be able to do what you wanted to do? Or was there like, oh, here's a good way for me to be able to use this thing that I did? Like, were you doing sketches when you grew up, or what was the source of you drawing? Was it out of perfunctory need, or was it?
No, I'd always enjoyed it. So I do. I think back to myself as a kid at primary school, and I remember drawing a lot then, and just really enjoying it as a I don't know, almost as a kind of meditation, as well as enjoying actually creating something and having something to show at the end of it. And I did art at school, so at secondary school. So we have GCSEs are the first set of exams, and then the second set when you're 18 are A levels. And I did sciences because I was going to go off to do medicine, but I also did art A level. So I managed to keep it going till then. And then actually, and I'm slightly embarrassed about this, I took my portfolio up to a big trade show in Birmingham when I was 18, and managed to get a gig doing drawings for greetings cards. And so when I was at university and in my third year, and I was strapped for cash, I managed to fund myself through the third year of university by drawing cute dinosaurs for a range of greetings cards.
You're literally describing yourself as a Renaissance person. You're like, that's what we just like, oh, well, sure, I dabbled in medicine, but then I got into biology, then I got into anatomy, and then I became I got a part-time doctorate. And by the way, I also funded myself as being an amazing artist. You basically just kind of described like Da Vinci, like unless you started creating like helicopters and stuff and military things, then you're just one notch below, and not a womanizing alcoholic. But
that you can say that because you haven't seen the purple iguanodons and the pink stegosauruses that I drew. They were
But now I kind
not
of
that
need
good.
to. Like
Not
now,
that good.
now I kind of need to. Do
Oh
you?
no, I'm sorry, Troy. They're stuck in the top of the loft. I can't possibly get hold
Well,
of them.
but at some point it's going to be like, here's a greeting card. Hope you get feeling better. I don't even know what the caption would be like if you were responsible for those. I it's easy for someone like me, and people have relegated this to me as well. It's you're either an artist or you're a professional. It's like there are these two binary choices: either you are this or you are this. And to conflate the two, a lot of people feel I've seen is like, well, no, man, you're an artist. You can't be a scientist and an artist at the same time. Do you feel that science is that extension of you being an artist as much as the art is you being extension of you being a scientist?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen those kind of dividing lines between subjects quite so definitely. And I think that a lot of what we do in higher education is almost about breaking down the barriers between subjects that have almost been instilled into children during their secondary education. And I don't know if it's as bad in the States as it is in the UK, but we do. I do feel quite strongly in the UK that our system of secondary education, so from the age 11 to age 18, encourages children to think of themselves as either artistic or scientific. That's my husband sneezing in the
Bless him.
background. I might should I backtrack and do that one again?
Not at
Did you
all.
hear him
No,
sneezing?
that's all content, man. That's the
You'll
best.
be
We're
going, oh
keeping
no,
it real.
oh no.
That's why we say it's legit. It's like, this is the real stuff, warts and all.
But yeah, so we do. I mean, I think it's because of the narrowness of subjects once you get to A level that you can only really do 3 or 4 subjects at A level. And if you are looking at doing a science degree at university, then it's pretty much got to be mostly sciences. So we are kind of asking our children to conceive of themselves as either more towards the arts and humanities end of the spectrum or towards the science end of the spectrum, and discouraging them from thinking of themselves as much more rounded and interested in all of those things. And I think there's a real negative impact in both ways of that, because I think it's a shame to become so shifted towards the scientific end of the spectrum that you kind of lose sight of what the humanities and the arts can do for you and for society. And equally the other way around, I really worry about people shutting themselves off from science and thinking that science is somehow not for them and not accessible, and they don't understand it and it's difficult and it's it's not for them. So I think that we could do much better. So I think that of encouraging our children to grow up embracing all of those different disciplines.
I would agree, because even like me growing up, it was backed by science, rabbit ears, to say, well, left brain, right brain, right? This is science. Your left brain does this. Your left brain does the serious work, and your right brain is the dream. That's where all of the creative stuff happens. So there's this, assumption, and therefore I feel like there's this predilection to, if you're going to be doing something in maths or science or anything that is left brain activity, that's the real stuff. That's the serious stuff. Therefore, you must be serious. That's why when we talk about, Brian Cox and being like a rock star, and like you break the mold, because there's this prejudice, I think, going into, is like, this is serious and right brain is not serious. And there's artistry that only happens on the right side, and there's no art that can happen on the left side. But you just kind of like, and I've enjoyed our conversations in Colorado, and but really kind of digging into what it is exactly you've done, and some of the key moments that at least have popped up consistently in doing research on you, is that you are more of an artist than you are, or in the classical sense, your science is your art. And there's a few things that stuck out to me. Even the way that you view things, you have a tendency to kind of be on the fringe when it comes to the way that we normally think about things. And I feel like I've seen you break down a lot of preconceived notions. I'm going to say this wrong. The cave paintings at Lascaux, is that Lascaux?
Yeah.
Okay. which you spent an extensive amount of time there, correct?
Not in actual Lascaux, which is
Just
sad
studying them
because of
then.
course well, no, I've been to Lascaux too. So what's interesting about Lascaux, which has some of the most beautiful cave paintings that have ever been found, is that they opened up the entrance of it, and that completely changed the atmosphere inside the cave and started to destroy the paintings. So the original Lascaux is pretty much shut. Very, very few people ever get in it. I have been in Lascaux too, which is an extremely good, and it's kind of next door, an extremely good replica. I mean, it is so good that if you didn't go in through the kind of concrete tunnel, I think if somebody managed to kind of whisk you in and then whisk off the blindfold, you wouldn't know it wasn't real. It's pretty good, but it's not the original because the original's under threat, which is such a shame.
And
I
these
think
are
that
just so people know, if you did know, because I didn't know before this, these are it's a system of caves that were break date about 15,000 years ago. Is that about right?
yeah, they're kind of late ice age, but there are cave paintings going back much earlier than that as well. So we've got cave paintings going right back into the depths of the ice age. And actually we have some very early dates now on some of the cave paintings in Spain, which are so early that we know that they're not modern humans, they're Neanderthals. Which is really exciting. That's something that's come out in the last 10 years. We've been able to date those paintings for the first time. It's been very tricky to date cave paintings, as you can imagine. And a lot of the time they've been dated simply by association with what else is in the cave. So if you've got a hearth in the cave and you've got some charcoal, you can radiocarbon date it. But a friend of mine actually was involved in developing this. He's called Alistair Pike, and he was at Bristol University while I was there for a while. And he pioneered a technique where you could actually date the flowstone over the top of the cave painting. So these caves are mostly in limestone caves. And that means that they do get covered up over time by the water running over the surface of them and depositing mineral in front of them, and you can actually date that mineral using various radiometric dating techniques. So that is astonishing. So where they've managed to date them, they found some that are going back, more than 40,000 years ago. So that means they must have been created by Neanderthals, which is great because we never used to think Neanderthals painted.
What does that change for you to understand that? That does that for you break? I see your excitement too, but what does that mean for you to know that that's a possibility?
It means that that artistic urge is not just in modern humans. So we consider modern humans, Homo sapiens, like you and I and everybody listening, to be, a particular species, Homo sapiens, a species that originated about 300,000 years ago. And we consider Neanderthals to be a completely separate human species, Homo neanderthalensis. They're a cousin species, though, or sister species. So we would have had a common ancestor going back maybe about 800,000 years ago, but then they start to split away from each other. And archaeologists have been asking for a long time, what are the differences between those two groups? And why do we see modern humans surviving and Neanderthals not surviving as we get to the end of the ice age? Is there something different? Is there something innately superior about modern humans that Neanderthals just didn't quite have? And the idea has been that there was something superior about the way we thought about the world, and perhaps that kind of artistic expression was part of that represents, I don't know, higher cognition in some way. And what's been rather marvelous about the last 20 years is that's been completely destroyed. We've just found more and more evidence that Neanderthals were pretty much behaving exactly the same as modern humans at that time. You can't compare Neanderthals 30,000 years ago, 40,000 years ago with modern humans at the same time. You've got to look at the modern humans that were around then. They do things a bit differently, but we find now that Neanderthals are painting just as modern humans were. We find that Neanderthals were interested in adorning themselves, so they pierce teeth to make presumably necklaces. We don't have the cords they were hung on. We just have the pendants. And they were making very sophisticated stone tools. They had a slightly different technique than the modern humans. So all of that's interesting because it suggests that there's a kind of a cognitive package there, and that there's a brain in a particular way that brain works, which is quite similar to the way that the brain is working in modern humans. And I suppose what's then important from an evolutionary sense about that is that you then think, well, the likelihood is that those people have been similar in that way since the two species separated. So you're probably looking at the kind of origin of those traits that we would think of as being very human, and certainly today uniquely human, unique to our species, going way back, into the Pleistocene, hundreds of thousands of years ago.
I have used the notion of especially cave paintings as evidence to me that we are all storytellers. And I'm not sure what was on the walls of Lascaux, but by and large, what I've seen is that and you and I talked about this too, but the language derived from a necessity for us to tell our story. The same way that since we've been painting on walls, there's been this, like you said, this artistic urge that is, now you're saying, doesn't just belong to a subsect of a species, but it seems to be pervasive throughout life, of being able to try to communicate and tell our story. That's why we created language. And I remember asking you, we were walking from lunch, just out like in a little restaurant outside, and then we were going back into the theater. And me growing up the way that I did, there was always this, I always want to try to, I lean on the unexplained, whereas science seeks to, or as at least I thought at the time, science sought to explain the unexplainable. And I said, well, how can you explain these things? How can you explain love? How can you explain music? And I don't know if you remember your response, but it has stuck with me so much. And I want to make sure that I'm not misquoting you, because I've quoted you quite often. But you said there's a lot of research that now suggests that we were singing before we were speaking, and that because speaking is a far more reductive way of communicating, because there's so much more information that's contained within singing. Do you remember that conversation?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. So I've got a colleague called Steve Mythen who's written this amazing book called The Singing Neanderthals, and that's kind of part of his concept, his theory, really. And what he did was sort of look at, I suppose, the comparative evidence for communicating through song, communicating through music, and looking across the rest of the animal kingdom. Because I mean, for me, at the end of the day, we're animals. There's a massive gulf today between us and our closest living relative, which are chimpanzees. There's a huge gulf in terms of the way we communicate, and in terms of what we create and what we're able to create, technology, culture. I would roll it all up together. I would call that culture. But at some point, even if I was saying that there was a common ancestor with Neanderthals, there was a common ancestor with chimpanzees as well. So you go back about 5 million years ago to find a common ancestor between us and chimpanzees. So at some point we started to evolve off in a different direction. But I see a lot of what we do, even though today, because you haven't got any species in between us and chimpanzees doing things in a slightly different way, it looks like there's a massive gulf. It looks like an absolute difference between us and other animals. And I think people find it really hard to get their heads around that. They find it really hard to get their heads around the idea of humans as evolved organisms like anything else, because we just feel so different. We're surrounded by technology. We do, we modify our environment to an extent that no other animal does. But if we go back in time, we can see the origins of that, and we can see how that's accumulated over time, so that now it looks like a massive difference between us and our closest living relatives. But we can see where it's come from, and we can see that it's a matter of degree rather than an absolute difference. But I think that, the idea that singing is a communication, I mean, part of Steve Mythen's idea, it's a beautiful book, and it's very it's so thoroughly researched. But part of the idea of it is the fact that singing and music is a very immediate form of communication. You elicit an emotional response in somebody else. It's immediate, isn't it? You create this emotional response, And that might be making somebody excited, or it might be making somebody feel part of a group. And you can see how that works then evolutionarily, that music isn't just an add-on. It's not just a sort of frivolous thing. It's actually part of how we operate as a social species. And art, I think, is part of that as well. So I think I do feel, in again going back to education, that sometimes we push these things to one side as though they're not as worthy. That is art and music are kind of, that's what you do when you've got through the rest of it. And we're seeing this in our primary schools in the UK, that the curriculum is so full of what they've got to get through in terms of the English, the ridiculous amounts of grammar that we teach our children. I mean, my children are both primary age, and it's just horrendous. They come home with I think when my daughter, she's 10 now, when she was 8 she came home with homework, and she had to read a paragraph and pick out the fronted adverbials. I was like, what is a front? I've written 9 books. I don't know what a fronted adverbial is.
Oh,
and
man.
This is what they're teaching our primary school children. So it's not any surprise really that there's not much room left in the curriculum for more creative things. And it's almost like the creative stuff is considered to be, well, that's just fun. And we'll just squeeze that in if we've got time for it. I think it's much more important than that.
Right. Because like what you're talking about is the fact that Neanderthals could have adorned themselves. They could have had, you can start extrapolating all you want. Did they have rituals? Did they have cliques? Did they have some kind of social structure? All of these things to me seek to at least give comfort, or even answer some bigger questions like, are we alone? Because that seems to be by and large more than anything else of being able to communicate and articulate ourselves well and express ourselves well, of course, and understand how the world works. And again, I feel like if you start pulling on the thread of education, then you can easily go, well, then what does it matter at all? And that's what most people are going to do, is they go, well, if this is frivolous, if I shouldn't learn this, then I shouldn't learn anything. It's like, no, you should learn all of it. But to just say and create this hierarchy of like, the frontage, frontage verbs mean this much, but then understanding how the Neanderthal worked doesn't. It's the fact that it's all knowledge, it's all wisdom, it's all seeking to answers, or seeking answers to questions that we all somehow ask, which is, am I alone, and what is the purpose of all of this? And there was so much that I learned just in a very, very brief conversation with you that challenged a lot of the I didn't realize this. I would say beliefs at first, but I think they were far more than that. I think they were paradigms. I think that they were not just a singular ideal or an idea, but they were more about how I thought and how I looked at things. And to say, I always thought that evolution, you changed my mind about this, man. It was so cool. About survival of the fittest. And the way that I'd always thought about that specific phrase is whoever was strongest, whoever could run faster, whoever was physically more adept, that's who evolution chose to promote. And I remember the look on your face, everything. You completely shattered that with one of those like, man, like literally like 40 years of thinking about something. You're like, oh no, the sky's green. You just like flipped it out of me. Do you remember that as well? And explain it.
Yeah,
you'll do a better job of it.
I think there's a lot of these kind of misconceptions about evolution, because it is a misconception that are floating around. And I think that some of that, again, I mean, you can kind of blame education for that, and I hope that we're kind of getting there with even if you don't study biology to at the end of secondary school or high school, you should have a bit of an idea about how evolution works. And in the UK, we've I think about 3 years ago, Humanist UK, which is our leading humanist charity that I'm president of at the moment, launched a campaign to get evolution into the primary school curriculum. So it's in the secondary school curriculum in biology, but we felt quite strongly that it was important to get it in primary school, also because we've got a little bit of a problem with creeping creationism. Maybe come back to that. But we thought it was important, and I thought it was incredibly important as a biologist to start tackling some of the basic concepts about evolution, which are actually quite simple, but also easy to misunderstand at primary school level, because it explains biology. I would say that evolution is as fundamental a concept in biology as the sun being at the center of the solar system and gravity is, if you're learning about physics and the universe. So it is important to get it in there. And one of the big misconceptions is the survival of the fittest thing, which is a real shame, actually, because it means that evolution gets a bad rap, because it does sound like, you have got to be the strongest, the best, the most physically fit in order to survive. And it's a very kind of it's a very kind of black and white view of evolution. I'm struggling with this. It's actually wrong. It's just, let's face it, it's wrong. It's wrong. It's an unfortunate phrase, because it's one of those Victorian phrases that now really makes no sense in modern English or American English. The phrase was, I think it was at one point used by Darwin, but it wasn't coined by him. And
I didn't know
the way that phrase is used is, the fittest doesn't mean physically fit. It means that you fit your environment. So it means that here's a bunch of individuals from one particular species. Here's the environment they live in. The ones that are going to be most successful in terms of, what's evolutionary success, surviving and reproducing. The ones that are going to be able to survive and reproduce better are the ones that fit their environment. So if they're able to find food in that environment, if they're able to find mates as well, because the environment is also the other organisms around you, then they are going to be most successful at surviving and reproducing and passing on their genetic material to the next generation. So that's all that it means. It just means you fit your environment. And so, at one point in time, that might be, it might be that being the fastest does help you fit your environment. That if you're a very fast cheetah and you can bring down an antelope, that's great, and that probably is going to be very important. But you could be a very fast cheetah. I'm trying to think of an analogy now. You could be a very fast cheetah who smelt really awful, so never got to mate and pass its genes on, and so it's a failure. So it wasn't fittest, even though it was fast. So it's much more broad, and I think it's just unhelpful as a phrase, because we don't understand that Victorian use of the word fit anymore.
What did a number on me was I started looking at that and applying.
It sounds like we basically spent a week together, and I just went no to it.
Yeah,
no.
I keep trying to make sure that I contextualize this. Going, this was we had 2 days, and that was primarily filled with learn your lines, learn your marks. We got to run through this technically, and then do a show in a matter of 48 hours. And then we had one lunch that we got to say, go get some food so you don't pass out. And in that short amount of time, my fundamental belief about the way that the world works was that, which is a true testament to you, because you're like, oh man, I'm going to fuck with your head in a way that's never been before. And I walked away a changed man. But it literally was those two primarily, those two primary things, which was understanding that evolution doesn't promote anything. It just simply allows and permits. And it just, if this is what's the environment is, and this is who is adapting better, then that's what's going to happen. But it's not this autonomous force that goes, or a judge that goes, you're good, you're bad, I punish, I grant. And that's the way that I felt like it always looked, which, especially growing up someone who grew up in a system of faith that says everything is competing for that position with this thing. There is a God, and everything is trying to supplant that and usurp that. And evolution is one of those things. It was taught to me that those things could not coexist, that they were in competition with each other, as opposed to two things that were seeking to explain the same question. They were seeking to answer the same question. That is an eternal question of why.
Yeah.
But I look at what the impact that that had on me when you said it's whoever adapts better, whoever is looking at the current environment and going with the flow better, that's who's going to be able to pass their genetic material on to the next, and that subsect of humanity is what's going to continue to flourish. And
Yeah, and
so
when we look across biology generally and think about how that works, it's there's so much chance involved as well, because a group of organisms can become very well adapted to a particular environment, and be doing extremely well, and then you can have a shift in the environment, which might be a climatic shift, and then suddenly most of them are doing very badly. And so you see things like that with the demise of the dinosaurs is a total case in point for that, because people say, oh, dinosaurs terrible, they didn't adapt, they didn't evolve. Dinosaurs were amazing, they were around for millions and millions of years, they evolved, they
inspired
radiated
greeting
out.
cards, they did.
Exactly. I mean, who knows? Iguanodons might have been purple, we don't know. And they were an immensely successful bunch of animals. And then a massive rock falls out of the sky and it plunges the world into the equivalent of a nuclear winter. And it doesn't matter how well adapted you were to the environment before. When that happens, I mean, most of them were stuffed. The only ones that survived were the little feathery ones, and that's been something amazing during my lifetime, that we're now absolutely sure that birds are dinosaurs. So the dinosaurs didn't actually die out at all. Most of the land ones did. Most of the terrestrial ones did, apart from these little flying things. But so the dinosaurs incredibly well adapted. Things change, and suddenly they're not so. They didn't fit their environment at the point that Chicxulub hit. And the ones that could squeak through, who may have been struggling before, they may not have been
prey.
The best adapted.
By and large,
they have been running away. And then they suddenly woke up and went, oh, that seems to be.
But that is fortunately
gone.
that is an extremely, to our knowledge, has only happened. It's happened on smaller levels, but that one has only happened once. And then every 10 years or so, we'll make a movie about it happening again. But
other things have things have happened during our evolution as well. So we know from genetics that the human population went through a number of bottlenecks. We call them bottlenecks. You can imagine the population being really big, and then it kind of narrows in as though it were a bottleneck. And crashing to numbers which it's very difficult to estimate, but we estimate crashing to numbers perhaps even less than 10,000. So we would consider that to be an endangered species today. And to think that is in our past, and we managed to get through it, is quite extraordinary. We just go, oh, we're so successful now, there's billions of us, it's always been like that. It hasn't. There have been times when humans have been really, really under pressure.
How often does that happen? And is there can you look at it and go, that's every 10,000 years? This kind of seems to bottleneck up. Is there any kind of empirical data to support a cycle?
Well, no, not really, because a lot of it is just random shit happening.
Great.
Yeah. I mean, it's like Chicxulub falling out of the sky, or like a really huge volcanic eruption happens somewhere, and again, really, really brings the climate down. And I think that also makes us think differently about the climate today, and the fact that our whole civilizations have grown up in a period of relative climatic stability, and we are pushing that now, and we're entering a period of potential climatic instability, and we're not quite sure what that's going to do to us as a species. So that's quite worrying.
Does that in any way change, because you're able to look at it and go, this is what happens, this is just quote natural selection, like this, a species does this, the environment adapts or the environment changes, and then this therefore happens to that species, you bottleneck, you go down to potentially 10,000 people. Blows my mind.
Mad.
That's not a small town. Like that's a high school graduating class of some people. That's crazy to think. So you look at that, and then you go, but then you come back, and this is just kind of the way that it works. Does that change your perspective on how you look at tragedy? To go, this just I have to look at it and go and marvel at nature and go, this is just how the world works.
It is just how the world works. I think for me, it really brings home the fact that there's an awful lot of chance in our species being here. There's not, there was nothing inevitable. The brilliant Stephen Jay Gould, who was a great inspiration to me when I was kind of starting out as a biologist, and I read all his stuff when I was a teenager, said, if you reran the tape of life again, you wouldn't get the same outcome. And I believe that, there's so much chance and contingency along the way that actually you would get a whole load of different species falling out of it. You probably would get something like mammals. You probably would, and amongst mammals, you can say, well, it's probably relatively likely that you're going to get something with a largish brain, because you've got sociable animals, and if you've got any that are particularly sociable, like primates, they're going to get a large brain. But you just would not end up with the same pattern of life that we've got on the planet today. So for me, that just makes me feel incredibly lucky. We're lucky to be here as a species. We're lucky to be here as individuals, and you have to then think, well, I'm going to grasp that and create meaning in my life.
You've sat and made a career out of discovering, studying, and trying to extrapolate information about technology that was available to whatever level of human that was there at that time. What has that taught you about those? Like, what has been revelatory about, oh, they had these stone tools, the Neanderthals had these stone tools, this is what they were doing, this is the technology that was available to them. What has been revelatory about that era of person, being, life? And do you feel that there's something to be gleaned from that now based upon the technology that we have? Do you feel that that's equally now as revelatory about us?
I think that, looking back in the past, and at the moment I'm just getting to the end of writing a book about it's a history of Britain, but it's not as parochial as it sounds, through burial practice. So looking at lots of different burials and seeing what each one tells us about a particular period in time, from the Paleolithic, the Old Stone Age, all the way through to I got as far as the Iron Age. I was hoping to get a bit further than that, but I've already written 100,000 words, and I'm only as far as the Iron Age. I think studying that in detail and trying to understand those people's lives, I think the most revelatory thing is that people were people. And then that sounds mundane and not that revelatory, but I think we tend to think of ourselves as being very different today, and very different because of all the technology that we have. But I think there's something quite fundamental inside us that, if you brought a Stone Age baby into 21st century Britain or the States, they would grow up and they would speak the language, and they would get on with the technology, and they'd be teenagers on TikTok, and they're just people are people. And what shapes us more than anything is the culture that we grow up in. And I think that we have this kind of slight idea of superiority, that we're better than these people that went before, and we're only better because of that old cliche that we're standing on the shoulders of giants, that we've accumulated all of that knowledge and all of that information up to this point now.
You never cease to amaze me, even though it's just been, again, a handful of interactions, but even just a statement like that, that we do have a natural tendency I have a natural tendency to think that I am clearly, because I have a better grasp on words, or because I have technology that allows me to be able to do certain things, that somehow I am superior. But then I look at what's happening right now, specifically in our country. There's at this time there's a, regardless of whatever you think, it's a tragedy whenever a human life is lost, especially at the hands of violence. And to see how our culture still responds to that is very, as Joe Rogan says, we're still monkeys. And you put us in a certain situation, and we will reveal to you how primal and primate we are, primitive we are. And a lot of that is when we feel threatened by an opposing force, and this sense of injustice. and
Mm.
how much people will choose violence as a protest for violence. That's one thing that I don't understand. But I do believe that it's because it hits at that, whatever that thing that is that common thread that ties us back 300,000 years. That same thing that was like, if I take this heavy thing and hit you on the head with this heavy thing, I win this argument, because you stop arguing with me. It's that same common thread through everything. Um, there's something that a quote that I found, and I've been curious to see, because we're speaking about humanity and, like you said, the common thread, that it's not just us, and that we can't think of ourselves as this isolated, elevated version of life, but that we are still on a long enough timeline. It's really, we've been here for a blip.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how much has changed just in a short amount of time. Margaret Mead. Are you familiar with Margaret Mead? She was.
What is it? The Grace, the Child, and the some. Yes. Yes.
I was
Developmental
fascinated by
psychology.
this.
Yeah.
American cultural anthropologist, and someone
Mm.
asked her about when she believed that civilization started, and she said that we found a femur that had broken and healed among remains of other humans. That, she said, is the start of civilization, and I didn't understand it. And I was talking to David, who did so much of this research, and he said, think about what that means. What does that mean to you? That this is, for her to say, this is the start of civilization. We found a femur that had broken and healed among the remains of others.
So she's looking at that as an example, which shows that somebody was cared for, that there was that is evidence of compassion. That you've essentially got a group where somebody is incapacitated, because if you break a femur, you're totally incapacitated. That's you're not moving for a
Right.
while with a broken femur. So that means that person is looked after. That means the people around them are bringing them food and are caring for them. Whether or not it shows, I mean, I would argue about the use of the term civilization, because I think that's something a bit different. But in terms of showing that empathy and compassion go way back, I think that, yeah, she's right. And we do see evidence of that. And again, there's evidence amongst Neanderthals, and possibly going even further back as well. So we've got a fantastic collection of fossil remains from the Republic of Georgia, from a place called demise, where they were excavating a medieval castle and sort of got down to the bottom of the castle, and then suddenly found that they had these incredibly ancient remains of what we think is an earlier species of human called Homo erectus. And there again, there's evidence of quite severe pathology, which suggests that they must have been looking after each other. And then in some ways, I just don't find it that surprising, because we're talking about social animals. We're talking about animals that survive by cooperating with each other. And you were focusing on the kind of the violent streak in human nature. And, I think that is there, but I think it's overplayed. And I think for me, when I look back across human history and prehistory, yes, you see violence, and yes, you see, horrendous atrocities, and we have evidence now of genocide in the Neolithic. But this is when people are under pressure and fighting over territory, all of those things, as you said. What we also see, and what we don't talk enough about, are these more positive examples of people looking after each other, of people coming together and cooperating. And I actually think that it is the elephant in the room, that is what's happening most of the time, and that violence isn't necessarily, at the core of human nature in the way that a lot of people assume it is. And I also don't think that there's anything kind of inevitable about that kind of violence or immorality within people. I think that you can educate people to be more moral, and I think that society over time is becoming more moral as well. So I think I would totally point to the kind of rights revolutions of the last 150, just over 150 years, and say that those are real advances in terms of human progress. That the abolition of slavery, women's rights, children's rights, gay rights. Those are all advances and progress us and enlarge our humanity. So I don't feel as depressed, I suppose, about this kind of innate violent streak. I think that we have other moral values that we can promote, and we can do that as individuals, and we can do that as a society.
That's beautiful. I can't think of a better way to end. What a beautiful statement. You are. I'm honored to know you, and I feel equally honored to be able to sit and talk and learn from you. And it's something that I look forward to being able to do more of this, because the true mark, I think, of wisdom is when it can challenge the preconceived notions and the assumed wisdom of somebody else, and the things that you say challenge the way that I think. And that, to me, is that's my jazz. That's what I love, because I don't want to find people that just reinforce what I believe. I want to find people that challenge what I believe, and
it is
allow me
great. I
to-
mean, that's
yeah.
that's the way you advance your understanding, isn't it? I mean, I think conversation, debate, dialogue. That's how we create knowledge, and that's how we kind of push it forward.
Yes.
It's been lovely chatting to you. I mean, I'm in here, and my husband is somewhere else in the house, and completely in awe. He's going, "What? Uncharted?" He was
Really?
Uncharted.
Oh my
Oh my
gosh.
god. What's the other one?
The Last of Us. Yeah.
Yeah.
June 19th.
So he's a little bit starstruck.
Oh man.
I was like, you should come and see Troy, and he's like, no, I can't.
Oh, that's hilarious. You tell him I want to apologize in advance. Come June 19th, your house is going to be probably just like, everybody get out. I'm going to finish this game, and I'll be curious to see what you think.
You'll never get me and the kids off it though. We're playing we're playing Ori 2 at the moment.
Oh man, yeah.
Very lovely.
Beautiful artistic
it's very
game.
lovely. It's got some scary bits though. Yeah.
Does it?
So the kids are for my kids. So my kids are 7 and 10.
Right.
And some of the big boss fights they're a little bit scared about.
It can be intense, yeah. Ori and the Blind Forest was pretty there were some moments of yeah, I could get that. My son is 2, and I'm fascinated by him right now because he's just obsessed with the Beatles. And his favorite thing, he'll watch 3 videos. It's a 1969 broadcast of the last time that the Beatles ever played Hey Jude together. And he'll sing along with it. And his favorite song is Yellow Submarine. He'll sing along with that. Or Eleanor Rigby. And we were in the kitchen, and we're just kind of like messing about and just, cooking and cleaning and whatnot. And Eleanor Rigby comes on, and he just kind of looks up, and without looking at it, he goes, Revolver. And I was like,
oh,
that's right. You're absolutely right. That is on. Holy crap. And he's like, George, Paul, John, and Ringo. And I was like, and who's your favorite? And right now he's saying Ringo. So we're going to have to work on that one. But
yeah.
I was like, Paul is your favorite. Paul is your favorite.
That's brilliant. You've got your own little anthropology experiment going on there as well. I mean, that's just children are just great. Just like, anthropology, brilliant, happening right there in front of your eyes.
It absolutely is, to watch this, like, and realize the responsibility that I have also to make sure that I'm not the material that I'm passing on to him is truly something that is of his benefit. It's been a big challenge for me as a dad, that I want to make sure that I don't continue to pass on stuff that should probably fall off. He doesn't need an extra appendage when it comes to that. So it's been a beautiful experiment, and one that I learn from every day. I hope that we get to continue this, because and again, I want to thank David and Tom both for doing so much of this research. And there's so many questions that I could ask you about that I want to. So when does your book come out? When is 3 Burials?
Oh, it should come out, I think, early 2021. I think it. It's tricky. It's a tricky time, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, there's sort of we haven't really talked about that. But yeah, so it's. I think the publishing house is okay, and I think things are going to plan in that regard. So yeah, I mean, I'm doing a lot of writing at the moment because I was in the middle of filming when the virus really got going in Britain, and we entered lockdown. So obviously all that filming stopped, and at some point I'll be able to go back out. We're just thinking at the moment about whether we'll be able to go and film in London in July. I think it might be a bit
Oof.
too early. Yeah. Most of what we're filming was outside. We might be able to go into some spaces like St Paul's though, and that might be relatively safe because there just won't be anybody around.
Mm.
But it's such a strange time at the moment. And I have lots of conflicted views about it, and I find myself being quite optimistic at times and then quite depressed about it at other times, and
What causes the
hoping that
flip for
we're
you? What changes that for you?
I think a lot of it has been political, actually.
Mm.
So I think I started out being quite optimistic about the policy being led by the science in Britain, and I'm not so sure about that now. I mean, it's and also the way that science is being used and is being talked about. It's kind of uncomfortable because it's being talked about as though it's quite a monolithic thing. So our politicians have been saying we're following the science, and you go, science there isn't the science. Science is a load of questions that we're trying to answer, and we're every day we find out more about this virus, and our strategies and our ambitions and our aims have to be modified according to the evidence that we've got coming in. So it is a bit nightmarish. I think one of the things that has depressed me about it is the way that it's thrown the inequality in our society into absolutely stark relief.
How
I
do you
mean,
mean?
there are some people who can afford to lock themselves away, and I'm one of those people. I'm really lucky that I can just afford to lock down at home, and I can still work from home.
Hmm.
I can't do some of my jobs, but I can do my writing, and I can do my university work, and that there are a whole load of people out there who cannot do that. So they can't remove themselves out of the system, and they can't reduce the number of contacts that they have, social contacts that they have, and protect themselves from transmission of the virus. And particularly, I think in the first weeks of lockdown, you go, well, who's still out there working? Healthcare professionals, some of whom are terribly badly paid, without adequate PPE, personal protective equipment. Key workers like our delivery drivers, all of those people who are some of the worst paid people in society, and they're the ones who are still out there keeping us all going. So I think, yeah, those inequalities, I think, have really been thrown into relief. And so it's kind of depressing in that way, but it's then I switched to being optimistic, going, okay, those inequalities have been thrown into relief, let's hope we do something about it. And then I think, well, will we, or will we just go back to what we were doing before when we emerge out the other side of this? I hope we don't.
Do you think though that this has been? We talked about the kind of the cataclysmic things that have happened a few times. I'm not comparing this to a meteor falling from the sky, but do you feel this has the potential to alter the way that our society functions for the better, or do you feel like we will forget this and move on, and it will become a footnote?
So in my brighter moments, I hope that it will change society for the better. And then in my darker moments, I go, no, it will just, it will go back to what it was like before. I mean, I think when you were talking about violence and the human kind of condition, the other thought I had was that I think this quite frequently, actually, and I think it's because of a lot of the work I do involves taking that long view of humans and interaction with the environment and interaction between different societies and different parts of society through time, is that I really think that if we're still here as a species in 500 years' time, and the historians and anthropologists in 500 years' time look back to now, they will just think that we're acting the same as we did in the Middle Ages. They won't see that much difference. Apart from the technology, they won't see that much difference between the 21st century and the 16th century in terms of politics and geopolitics. We look like a load of little city-states who are all setting each other up in opposition to each other rather than working together. And I think that's really disappointing. I mean, they'll see that, we've done amazing things with science, and particularly medicine, in over the 20th century, and that most people are enjoying longer lives, but they'll also see that there's this stark inequality in society. And I'm sure I hope in 500 years' time, people are going, why did they allow that to happen? They had the tools to stop these poor people dying. Why didn't they do that? I really do think that there's some ways in which we are still positively medieval in the way that we operate in our society, and perhaps coronavirus is making us confront that.
It's interesting to think about, people during the bubonic plague and everything, and we just kind of go, yeah, they just probably woke up every morning. It's like, well, yeah, we're just, I guess we're dying today. That's kind of like what we're, as opposed to contextualizing it with the way we are. And were there people that were just every day going out, and were they quarantining themselves? Were they probably? Yeah,
Yeah,
they
they were.
absolutely were.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, there's an amazing doctor. I've forgotten his name. That's annoying. Who wrote a diary, a little bit like Pepys, through the plague. And he stayed in London, and he laments the fact. So he's writing this diary in 1665 and lamenting the fact that many doctors have fled London, and also all the rich have gone. And you kind of go, oh, that's kind of happened here as well. So anybody who had anywhere they could escape to has gone, and we've seen that. And I saw that I can't remember where it was published, but there was an analysis of where the rich people from New York had gone to. All over the United States, and
the Hamptons were just overrun.
They had the means to escape. They did, and it's just the same as it's just the same as the plague. But they did, in the plague, they understood quarantine. The idea of quarantine had been around for a while at that point. The idea that you would seal yourself away for 40 days. That's what it comes from. And I think originally it came from outbreaks of infections on ships. So that if a ship came into port and there was an infection on the ship, then it would have to quarantine itself for 40 days before anybody was allowed off it. So they did understand that. They didn't understand germ theory. They didn't know how infections worked, but they did understand that they did spread from people, and that also you could cover your mouth and all of that sort of thing.
So I remember the big masks, that they wore.
Yes,
that were
strange things.
But now I understand, and it was like that the product it was a function of necessity. It was this will get me a distance away from you, and it's still I can't remember what those masks are called.
Terrifying.
Terrifying, yeah.
They do look terrifying.
Dreaming.
Yeah,
Guillermo del Toro, like his specialty.
But I think one of the interesting things about the plague, actually, that it did do was it did destabilize. The plague the mortality rate of the plague is worse than coronavirus. Thank goodness. We don't really know what the mortality rate of coronavirus is yet. I mean, I've been terrified about it since January, where we started to get the reports from China, and you kind of go, oh, right, it could be between 1% and 4%. This is it's looking a bit spicy. Yeah. The plague, when it wiped through London, wiped out 20% of the population. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And it, obviously had a massive effect in rural areas as well. And the big kind of effect it had in terms of society and economy afterwards was that workers got some rights, because suddenly there weren't enough people to work the land. You couldn't treat your labourers as badly as you had done before the plague, because you needed them. That you needed those labourers to come back and work the land. And so there was a bit of a change as far as workers' rights were concerned. So perhaps we will see some positive social outcomes.
I also, whenever there has been times of great tragedy, it's when art has flourished. It's when, we had the Renaissance came out of the plague, and this age of enlightenment where we just... I believe that's as a species, as a society, that's what we do, is we rebound from one side to the other. And if there's nothing else, that there is a common thread, is that we will do that. Where there is dark, we will find light. Where we are sad, we will be happy again. But we will continue to have that kind of dynamic all the way throughout. And if nothing else, maybe that's what makes us human. That's like,
Yeah, no, I think so. And I think we've seen an amazing outpouring of creativity during this difficult time. And I think that it's it is interesting to step back from that and go, this is part of, we need that, and it's part of how we respond to it. It's part of how you respond to that threat.
we're singing again. I'll have to send
Yeah.
you a link. There was something we did that was really cool. We did 3 weeks of. I wrote a song and reached out to some friends to see if they could help me, and then we ended up opening it up to the community, and we had about 100 people from literally all over the world that participated in it, and everybody recorded in isolation, and it was just like this really cool thing. It was like, look what we can do. Like it was a good little ray of sunshine in a very dark time to be able to go, we're going to be okay, because as long as we keep doing stuff like this and we work together, it was just a good thing to say. You may be within the confines of the four walls of your house, but that doesn't mean you can't express hope. You can express
Yeah.
love
Yeah.
and community. So
No, we had BBC Radio 1 doing a lovely thing like that, with artists recording, at home, all over the place, and doing the Foo Fighters Times Like These, which was just brilliant.
dude,
Kind of moves me to tears, because you just go, no, it's just amazing that people are coming together to do that.
for sure. And there's been multiple, like there was, the whole thing they did were like Elton John played at his house. It was like, you would never have done that before. That you would never have. And it's like, we're all in this together. Like, no matter who you are, you may be able to go to the Hamptons, you may be able to go to the Cotswolds and to the beach house in Brighton or whatever, and be able to be away from, by and large, the mass of society. But you're still, this thing will still hurt you. This thing, if nothing else, is the great equalizer, right? It is all of us that are trying to wrap our heads around our own mortality, and no matter how much we think that we have elevated or we're superior, we're still scared when it comes to, I might get sick. And that to me is a very humbling thing, to realize that we're still very frail. We're still very
Yeah.
susceptible
Yeah.
to just the smallest thing.
I agree with you, but then at the same time, I think that that whole thing about us all being in it together. If we come face to face with the virus, then suddenly that's it, and it's just you against the virus, and you've got absolutely no idea how your immune system, your own individual immune system, is going to cope with that. But in terms of we're all in it together and it's a great leveler, it's not. What we're seeing is a a huge discrepancy in terms of the people that are being impacted the worst, and it is socioeconomic. Those people that can protect themselves are protecting themselves, and those people that can't are going out to work in an inadequately protected way. So I think that
You're right.
we've got to fix that, and we will have another epidemic at some point, and we have to make sure that doesn't happen again.
What would you say would be the thing, if it's possible to distill it down? It's like, what would be the great I don't know if prevention, like if again, this is something that's just going to happen. Rocks are going to fall from the sky. Viruses are going to raise their, rear their head. What would be the thing that's like, if I could say this one thing, if you could point back to a future generation and say, what I've learned from this is that you need this, you must have this. What is that?
You have to. Well, I'm not going to have a few things now, Troy, I'm afraid. I know you said one thing. One thing would be to make sure that we were much better prepared in terms, we kind of knew what we needed, and both I think in the UK, we were inadequately prepared, given that it's been pretty high on the risk register for a while. We've known this is going to happen, and that's why we've been so scared when previous epidemics have broken out. And thank goodness they haven't turned out to be as bad as we initially thought they would be, with things like SARS and MERS. And I think that when you see governments that have actively dismantled not just strategies, but got rid of people that were in place to deal with that risk when it arrived, to deal with that virus when it arrived. We can make sure that we're much better prepared next time, and we can make sure that we act more quickly. We're in some ways we're in a good place. We're in a place where we've got quite rapid genome sequencing, and that is going to make a big difference to the way that we can track and trace and develop a vaccine and eventually reduce the impact on society. So that, you know, those things are positive. In terms of individual responses to it and equality, I think that one of the really big things that would make a massive difference, and I just don't know whether it's going to happen, and I'd love to see it in my lifetime, is a universal basic income. So that we're not saying, you know, your choice about whether you go out and expose yourself to this virus is not because you've got to put food on the table for your family. You know, that society's gonna sort that. You know, you will have food on the table. We will make sure everybody has an income. And, you know, there are people going out there who could choose to, you know, take 6 months off and not go to work, and they are going to work, and that's amazing. You know, on the front line, a lot of those healthcare workers, for instance, you know, so some of the doctors, some of the more poorly paid ones, won't have a choice. It's just not fair for people not to have a choice.